dive into the toxins that are being put in our food that are making us sick and overweight. I want to start out by asking you, how does this picture make you feel? If it's a comforting, familiar sight that instantly makes you want to head to the nearest drive-thru, you're not alone. And you probably won't have to drive far to find one, being that there's a fast food restaurant on practically every street corner in the United States. I live in a small rural town in Idaho, and even I have to only drive about 10 miles to the nearest McDonald's, Jack in the Box, Burger King, and Carl's Jr. Or better yet, apps like DoorDash and Grubhub make it so that now I don't even have to leave the comfort of my own home to get my hands on some of that greasy goodness. Which brings us to the number one reason why so many of us have so much trouble losing weight: the standard American diet. No course in weight loss would be complete without talking about it. In fact, if you're someone like me who loves to read and research, then you probably know a lot about it already. And you probably know that there's definitely a reason the acronym for this way of eating spells SAD. Because the saddest part of all is that this diet is not only why you can't lose weight, but it's literally, and I know I say literally a lot, and I'm sorry about that, but in this case, it's literally the culprit behind almost every single disease that I can think of. And on top of that, it's why you can't lose weight. Many of you are probably already aware of the fact that disease and nutrition are linked. And you might already know some of the information or a lot of the information that I'm going to be talking about in this class, but I want you to hear it again. Because sometimes you need to hear things over and over and over again before they finally sink in. And sometimes you just need to hear it from the right person at exactly the right time in your life when you're ready to not only hear it, but begin to take action. My mom used to get so annoyed with me because she would tell me something, and for whatever reason, I just couldn't really hear it at the time. Then much later, I would hear the exact same thing from someone else and think, oh yeah, that makes sense. And if you're someone who's hearing this information for the first time, I have to warn you that it can be a bit overwhelming. Actually, when you start to really learn and understand what's in most of the food we consume daily, it's enough to make your head spin. And hopefully enough to make you start wondering why. Because once you start learning and questioning things, you can start to make healthier choices for yourself and your loved ones. And you can also start to realize that it's not your fault that you haven't been able to lose weight. We've all been quite literally, there's that word again, sabotaged by not only the corporations who manufacture and process our food, but also by the very organizations designed to regulate them. This is called regulatory capture. This knowledge is the first step in taking back your power and will help you to not only take charge of your own health and wellness, but finally learn how to lose weight and keep it off for life. For those of you who already know this information and you already know it, but you haven't done anything with it, then that's my goal for you. Okay. In 2005, I was pregnant with my oldest son and happened to take a class in wildlife conservation. At the time, I wanted to be an animal control officer, and this was one of the required classes in my program. Now, what in the world, you might be thinking, does that have to do with weight loss? Well, nothing really. Not directly anyway. But it was at this time, at the age of 28, and in this conservation class, that I began to learn about the myriad of chemicals and pesticides that are present in our food, water, air, and soil. In fact, 7,000 chemicals are imported into the US every year. I couldn't believe the information I was learning. Why would people be putting chemicals and pesticides in our food? 15 years and countless research hours later, I still don't have a valid answer to that question. Well, I have an idea, but that's a subject for a different time. However, I do have a very good idea of how these chemicals and pesticides, along with a bunch of other factors, are destroying our health and wreaking havoc on our hormones. Which is why, according to the CDC, as of 2018, 42.4% of adults in the United States were considered obese. That's almost half of the population. Even worse, so were about 20% of the nation's children. That's 14.4 million children and adolescents. I'm sure you'll agree that there's something drastically wrong with these numbers. Something must be done, and it starts with education. In order to know how to fix this atrocity, we must find out the root cause or causes. What's in our food that's making us obese and sick? The answer to that question is multi-layered and extremely complicated because it's not just one thing that's the culprit. It's rather a combination of chemicals, sometimes used individually and sometimes paired up together, that are all pieces of this very sad puzzle known as the standard American diet. Since there are way too many of these problematic ingredients to discuss for our purposes here, we're going to be focusing on the 6 that are, in my opinion, the worst offenders. These are the ones that we have to cut out, or at least extremely limit in our diets if we want to be healthier and lose weight. The 2 that we're going to be talking about today are MSG and trans fats. Let's start with MSG. This is probably one that you've heard of before and one that's in pretty much all fast food, as well as in many of the food items that we buy at the grocery store. So MSG is the commonly known term for it. It's monosodium glutamate. And it's an additive that's been known to induce obesity in lab rats. Not only that, but it's linked with migraines, metabolic syndrome, numbness, rapid heartbeat, weight gain, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, eye damage, and high cholesterol. It's also known to make diseases like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's worse. And it's in almost everything you can order from almost every single fast food restaurant in America. Not to mention that it's also in a ton of packaged foods that we buy at the grocery store on a regular basis. Here are some of the most common ones: salad dressings, vegan meatless products, chips, tofu products, broths and soups, nuts, frozen dinners, bacon bits, veggie burgers, and seasoning blends. One thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of different terms to look for that indicate the presence of MSG. Some of them being torula yeast, yeast extracts, autolyzed yeast extracts, naturally flavored yeast extract, hydrolyzed anything, any kind of glutamate, umami, plant protein extract, gelatin, and natural smoke flavor, just to name a few. Now, the companies who produce these foods for human consumption must be aware of the many terrible side effects of MSG, right? They surely must be aware that it's considered a toxin, right? So then why would they continue to put it in our food? Because it adds flavor. Not to mention that it's highly addictive, which means we'll continue to buy their products. They'll keep getting richer and richer while we get fatter and sicker. All right, next we've got trans fats, usually in the form of partially hydrogenated oils. So these are made through a process called hydrogenation, which basically takes a polyunsaturated oil and changes it into a more solid fat. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole process, but let's just say it starts with cheap oils like corn, canola, cottonseed, or soy, and involves them being mixed with metal and emulsifiers, think like soap, pressurized with hydrogen gas, cleaned with bleach, and then filled with artificial flavors and dyes. Trans fats are linked with cancer, heart disease, stroke, multiple sclerosis, reproductive system harm, and insulin resistance, which can lead to obesity, diabetes, and heart disease. And yet, they're not only being used by almost every single fast food restaurant in America, but just like MSG, they're also in many of the food products we buy at the grocery store, including cakes, cookies, cinnamon rolls, crackers, frosting, coffee creamer, potato and tortilla chips, microwavable popcorn, donuts, French fries. And get this, companies can get away with stating 0 trans fats on their ingredient list as long as the food contains less than 0.5 grams. How crazy is that? Obviously, it's extremely important to make sure you read the full ingredient list on anything you buy. And if you see anything that says partially hydrogenated oils, that means trans fats. Once again, we must ask ourselves why these companies would continue to put trans fats in our food, knowing full well how harmful they are to us. The answer is, unfortunately, because they're cheaper and can be used repeatedly at very high temperatures. Oh, and they're addictive as well, of course. And here's another thing to think about. Say you just stopped at McDonald's on an impulse and ate a small bag of fries. No big deal, right? Wrong. According to Dr. Daniel Pompa, the body needs a total of 102 days to remove the majority of the trans fats and the adverse effects, including decreased nerve transmission, reduced focus, and an increase in hyperactivity and lowered immunity in the body. From one harmless little bag of French fries. So for today's homework, I want you to go through your fridge and pantry and check the ingredients on some of the items you find there. Look for the words that are synonyms for MSG and trans fats. Obviously, you don't need to check every single item, but I want you to check at least 5 and then fill out the worksheet on page 15 of your weight loss journal. Then the next time you go grocery shopping, or when you do your shopping online, or however you do that, I want you to see if there's an organic version for those 5 items, and I want you to replace your item with the organic one. I also want you to do this the next 5 times you go to the grocery store. And I have a page for you to fill out each time you go. And just remember, it's all about starting small. I read a book once by Jillian Michaels, and I remember she recommended that you literally, there's that word, throw out everything in your pantry and start over. She's super hardcore and super rich, I'm sure. Now, I don't know about you, but in our current economy, at least, I certainly can't afford to be throwing away food, even if it's not really food. If you can afford to do that and replace everything all at once, by all means, go ahead. But if not, it's okay to start small. Speaking of money, we all know that buying organic is more expensive. But when we think about how much we'll be saving overall by being healthier, we realize that the benefits far outweigh the extra cost. And if you're really hurting financially right now and you cannot afford the extra cost, even if it's just $1 or $2, I have been there and I understand. Don't beat yourself up about it. Just do what you can, say a prayer or blessing over your food, and start gradually replacing things as you're able to. Another thing to keep in mind is that organic food isn't always perfect either, but overall, it's going to be healthier than the regular version, and it's definitely a step in the right direction. And one more thing to consider, if there's no organic version available, maybe it's something you can do without. All right, that's it for today's class. Make sure you do the homework, have fun with it, and I'll see you in the next class. Love you. Bye.